Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a feeling I know we are all too familiar with: sheer, overwhelming digital fatigue. But listen, we aren't just going to sit here and give you generic screen time warnings. No way. Instead, we're going to examine this exhaustion through a really fascinating lens. We're blending evolutionary psychology with modern economic theory to figure out exactly why our modern work environments feel so literally draining. Okay, let's dive into this.
Let me start by asking you a quick question. Why is it that spending an 8-hour day sitting in a perfectly comfortable chair, just answering emails and jumping on virtual meetings, can leave you feeling vastly more exhausted than, say, going on a rigorous 10-mile hike in the woods? It's a total paradox of modern life, right? Well, the answer actually lies in a brilliant observation by philosopher Matthew Crawford. He said, attention is a resource. A person has only so much of it. Your focus? It isn't infinite. It's a finite, strictly biological resource, and it is constantly under attack from the exact moment you wake up.
Which brings us to Section 1, the attention economy, and how our focus has essentially become currency.
To really understand why our attention is under such heavy attack, we got to look at the business models surrounding us. So the crucial point is that human attention is now treated as an incredibly scarce commodity. We're talking up there with oil or gold. You know, those advertising-driven companies, the social media platforms, news sites, those incredibly addicting apps on your phone, they don't actually charge you money to use their services. Instead, they trade in your attention. They are financially incentivized to maximize the exact amount of time and focus you hand over to their products. Every single notification, every infinite scroll, every autoplaying video, it's all a very deliberate economic calculation designed to keep your eyes glued to the screen.
Now, this isn't an entirely new concept, even though it feels like it's reached hyperdrive lately. Way back in 1971, literally decades before smartphones were even a glimmer in a developer's eye, the psychologist and economist Herbert A. Simon actually saw this coming. He realized the problem of the future wasn't going to be a lack of information. I mean, we have all the information in human history sitting right in our pockets. The real problem, he said, is a lack of systems to filter out the irrelevant stuff. Because there is so much information fiercely competing for our eyes, our attention literally becomes impoverished. We are living through the mass monetization of our daily focus. And when a system prioritizes engagement above absolutely everything else, it generates what economists call negative externalities, basically unintended consequences for society. We see this playing out in a few major ways. First, platforms are explicitly designed to trigger dopamine in our brain's reward system, which fosters social media addiction and is directly linked to rising anxiety and depression. Then we see the amplification of sensationalized content or disinformation simply because, well, outrage generates more clicks, right? It keeps people engaged longer. Plus, there's surveillance capitalism, harvesting our behavioral data to keep us hooked. And finally, what's known as social interaction overload, where we are just so bombarded with digital solicitations that we completely burn out.
Moving into Section 2, our evolutionary wiring. Because we were built for the savanna, not the cubicle. So why exactly does this attention economy break us down so easily? To answer that, we've got to do a little time travel. For roughly 2.5 million years, which by the way is 99% of human history, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Scientists called this the environment of evolutionary adaptationists, or the EEA. Simply put, this is the environment that shaped us. Your brain, your body, your entire nervous system. They are completely hardwired to survive, work, and thrive in this ancestral, natural, outdoor setting. Evolution is an incredibly slow process. So, biologically speaking, you're still essentially a hunter-gatherer. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between these two worlds. Think about it. Ancestral work was intensely physical. It was outside, and it happened face-to-face within small networks of deeply familiar people. You hunted, you gathered, you made tools. Now look at us today. We are highly sedentary, slumped over keyboards, mostly interacting with floating heads on video calls. Your inner caveman is basically just sitting there utterly confused by Slack notifications. The way we actually evolved to work is pretty much the complete opposite of how we have to survive today. And that brings us to Section 3, the great digital mismatch. Ancient brains meeting new tech. So what exactly happens when an evolutionarily wired ape, meaning us, is forced to stare at a glowing rectangle for 10 hours a day? Well, it creates what evolutionary psychologists call an evolutionary mismatch. This happens when an organism's traits, which were perfectly adapted for its ancestral environment, are suddenly dropped into a novel, modern environment where those exact same traits are no longer helpful. In fact, they might actually be harmful. Our innate psychology for work was perfectly, beautifully adapted for surviving the savannah. It is completely misaligned with navigating endless chat channels, overflowing inboxes, and zooming across 4 different time zones.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visually traces that historical journey. If you follow it from our origins, you see the physical labor, gathering food from trees, working intimately with our hands and with nature. Then, as we move through the agricultural and industrial revolutions, we start seeing plows, we see factories, and finally, we arrive at the modern digital worker, tangled up in notifications and completely stressed out. It's essentially a biological mismatch, perfectly visualized.
Let's look at Section 4, Costs of Stolen Attention, unpacking the psychological cost.
When the hyper-optimized attention economy collides with our ancient nervous system, the psychological fallout is just immense. Make no mistake, digital work is highly efficient, but it comes with a seriously heavy toll on the digital worker. Because we just aren't built to be constantly on, this environment triggers chronic, nonstop activation of our stress and anxiety mechanisms. We end up suffering from directed attention fatigue. You know, that exact feeling of your brain being totally fried at 3 p.m.? We sit way too much, drastically reducing our physical activity. And this unnatural 24/7 digital connectivity, it means we never truly leave the office.
You have to remember, our cognitive resources are strictly limited. Our brains did evolve to handle complex social relationships, sure, but only within small tribes of maybe 150 people tops. Today, we're trying to manage hundreds of digital relationships, followers, endless email chains, and a barrage of notifications. You honestly have to feel a little sympathy for how utterly overwhelmed our brains must be. When all our mental bandwidth is allocated to managing these endless digital solicitations, we hit a wall called social interaction overload. And when that happens, our ability to actually perform deep work or, frankly, just maintain our basic well-being rapidly goes down the drain.
Which leads us to Section 5, Restoring Our Focus. Let's talk about some actual solutions for this burnout. Now, don't worry, it is not all doom and gloom here. Now that we actually understand the mismatch, we can look at some real science-backed solutions. This brings us to a wildly fascinating psychological framework called attention restoration theory, or ART. It was developed by researchers Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, and it acts as the perfect psychological remedy to the evolutionary mismatch we've been unpacking. ART basically proposes that spending time in natural settings physically repairs our cognitive capacity. It actually helps us recover from that intense, directed attention fatigue caused by all our digital work.
The real secret sauce of this theory lies in the difference between 2 very distinct types of fascination. First, you have hard fascination. This is exactly what screens demand. Think of a fast-paced video game, an endless social media feed, or a super dramatic movie. It fully captures your attention, leaves absolutely zero room for independent thought, and heavily drains your cognitive resources. On the flip side, we have soft fascination. This is what nature provides: the rustling of leaves in the wind, watching water flow in a stream, or just clouds drifting by. It's interesting, sure, but it's completely effortless. Soft fascination gently engages your brain's default mode network, which allows your mind to wander, reflect, and naturally restore its depleted attention reserves. Let's move to this and see how this builds into a really practical checklist. According to the research, a truly restorative environment actually needs 4 specific properties. First is being away, meaning you need psychological or physical distance from your daily digital routine. Second is extent. The environment has to feel immersive and have enough scope for you to explore. Third is compatibility. It needs to be a place you actually enjoy and feel comfortable in. And fourth is fascination. It must provide that gentle, effortless interest we were just talking about.
So how much of this natural restoration do we actually need to fix our brains? Well, the magic number is 120. Extensive scientific reviews have found that spending just 120 minutes a week in nature is heavily associated with good health and positive well-being. Think of it as a literal biological life hack to solve your fatigue. And the best part? You don't have to do it all at once. Single exposures of 30 minutes or more yield highly consistent, deeply restorative benefits for your brain. Knowing all this, we can actively design our lives to fight back against attention theft and start respecting our ancestral wiring. Modern organizations can incorporate literal green spaces or plants directly into the workplace. Schools can implement active outdoor education. And interestingly enough, if real nature is completely inaccessible to you, research shows that even virtual nature, like looking at high-quality landscape photos or VR nature simulations, provides measurable cognitive restoration. But most importantly, we need to design our jobs to purposefully balance those intense digital tasks with necessary physical, screen-free breaks. Which leaves us right here. We are, at our core, ancient creatures trying to navigate a hyper-modern world that is specifically designed to harvest our focus. But once you understand this evolutionary mismatch, you gain the power to correct it. Step away from the screen, go find a bit of soft fascination, and reclaim your cognitive resources. Because at the end of the day, your attention really is the modern world's most valuable currency. So how will you spend yours today?